At 0314 hours local time on July 30th, 2025, a senior radar operator at the Voronezh-Malshevo airbase was fighting the urge to close his eyes for just 5 seconds. He had been staring at the glowing green sweep of his Nebo-M radar screen for 6 straight hours, unaware that 200 kilometers to the south, a swarm of 38 Ukrainian-made long-range drones had already crossed the border and were currently flying nap of the Earth at an altitude of just 40 meters. In exactly 112 seconds, his routine night shift would dissolve into absolute chaos, marking the beginning of the single largest coordinated aerial offensive of the entire war. This was not a localized skirmish or a probing attack. Ukrainian mission planners had synchronized a strike package targeting 13 separate Russian regions simultaneously, stretching from the naval facilities in Sevastopol to the strategic oil refineries deep within the Russian interior. The operator's screen showed nothing but static and ground clutter, exactly as the Ukrainian engineers intended. The attacking aircraft were not the standard commercial quadcopters modified for trench warfare, but the latest iteration of the Lyutyy airborne drone, a low-cost aluminum and fiberglass monoplane that looks like a high school science project, but functions like a strategic cruise missile. Powered by a simple 50-horsepower internal combustion engine that sounds like a lawnmower, the drone carries a 75-kilogram warhead over a range of 1,000 kilometers, all for a price tag lower than a mid-range family sedan. While the Russian radar operators scanned the skies for high-altitude threats, the Ukrainian drone swarm was exploiting the physics of radar horizons. By flying below the tree line and following the contours of riverbeds, the drones remained invisible to long-range search radars that are designed to track fighter jets at 30,000 feet. But this low-altitude approach came with its own set of lethal risks. At 0316 hours, the lead drone in the Voronezh sector, designated Alpha 1, encountered a sudden localized jamming field emitted by a Pol-21 electronic warfare system. The system, mounted on a generic cell tower, began blasting noise across the GPS L1 and L2 bands, attempting to sever the drone's connection to its satellite navigation constellation. For 99% of commercial drones, this would result in an immediate crash or a drift into nowhere. But the Lyutyy's guidance computer had been upgraded with terrain reference navigation software. As the GPS signal dissolved into electronic static, the drone's downward-facing optical sensor began comparing the ground features below, roads, rivers, and tree lines, against a preloaded digital map stored in its internal memory. It was flying by sight in the middle of the night, correcting its course based on the geometry of the landscape rather than signals from space. The Russian electronic warfare officer watching his jamming efficiency monitor saw the signal disruption and assumed the threat was neutralized, completely unaware that the drone had simply switched its brain to a different mode and was continuing its terminal approach at 150 kilometers per hour. Simultaneously, 800 kilometers to the south, the situation over the Crimean Peninsula was deteriorating rapidly for the Russian Black Sea Fleet. At 0322 hours, air raid sirens began wailing across Sevastopol as a separate wave of Ukrainian drones approached from the sea. Unlike the silence of the overland approach, the maritime strike package was designed to be loud and visible, a deliberate tactic to overwhelm the localized air defense grid. The Russian Pantsir-S1 defense systems stationed around the harbor swung their turrets toward the incoming contacts, their phased array radars lighting up the night with tracking beams. The Pantsir is a formidable system, theoretically capable of tracking 20 targets and engaging 4 simultaneously with hypervelocity missiles. However, the Ukrainians were sending 12 drones at a single battery. It was a simple mathematical saturation attack. The first 4 drones were merely decoys, inexpensive foam-constructed wings fitted with Lundberg lenses, radar reflectors that made them appear as large as fighter jets on the Russian scopes. As the Pantsir batteries unleashed their missiles at these phantom targets, depleting their ready-to-fire ammunition, the actual strike drones, hugging the waves at 5 meters above sea level, slipped through the engagement envelope. The lead drone, carrying a specialized shaped charge warhead, was not aiming for a ship, but for the fuel storage facility that kept the fleet moving. The Russian operators were effectively playing a video game where the enemies spawn faster than the reload animation allows, and the game over screen involves a massive fireball. Back in the Ryazan region, the target was purely economic. The Ryazan oil refinery, one of the largest in Russia, processes 17 million tons of crude oil annually, turning black sludge into the jet fuel that powers the Russian Air Force. At 0330 hours, the facility was fully illuminated, a city of steel pipes and distillation columns glowing under industrial floodlights. To a drone's optical guidance system, it was the easiest target in the world. The specific aim point was not the storage tanks, which look spectacular when they explode but are easily replaced. The target was the primary atmospheric distillation column, a complex piece of engineering that separates crude oil into usable fractions. It is a 60-meter tall steel tower that takes 2 years to manufacture and install. Destroying it doesn't just burn fuel, it shuts down the entire refinery for 18 months. The approaching drone, now 5 kilometers out, began its terminal dive maneuver. The onboard flight controller adjusted the throttle to maximum, pushing the small piston engine to its limit. On the ground, a private security guard armed with an anti-drone gun looked up at the buzzing sound. He raised his rifle, a futile gesture against a 75-kilogram projectile moving at 180 kilometers per hour. The physics of kinetic energy meant that even if he managed to hit the drone with small arms fire, the wreckage would still slam into the delicate infrastructure with the force of a car crash. The impact at Ryazan occurred at precisely 0332 hours. The warhead did not just detonate on the surface of the distillation column, it utilized a delayed fuse set for 3 milliseconds after contact. This allowed the kinetic energy of the drone to punch through the outer steel cladding and insulation before the explosive charge triggered. The result was an internal overpressure event that turned the distillation tower into a giant pipe bomb. The blast wave shredded the internal trays used for chemical separation and ruptured the pressurized feed lines carrying superheated crude oil. Instantly, the volatile hydrocarbons ignited, creating a vertical column of fire that reached 100 meters into the night sky. But the true damage was structural. The heat from the burning oil began to soften the steel supports of the adjacent towers. Within 45 seconds, the structural integrity of the main processing unit failed, causing the massive tower to buckle and collapse onto the control center below. Millions of dollars of specialized petrochemical equipment were reduced to twisted scrap metal in less than a minute. The secondary explosions were visible on satellite thermal imagery from orbit, registering a heat signature so intense that automated forest fire detection algorithms in Europe triggered false alarms. This was the reality of the new war of attrition. A $20,000 drone had just inflicted $500 million in damage and erased 4% of Russia's refining capacity in the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, the scale of the operation was becoming apparent to the Russian National Defense Control Center in Moscow. Reports were flooding in from 13 different regions: Belgorod, Bryansk, Kursk, Voronezh, Rostov, Krasnodar, and beyond. The map of European Russia was lighting up with red icons indicating strikes and interceptions. Russian air defense commanders were paralyzed by the sheer breadth of the attack. They had concentrated their best systems, the S-400 and S-300 batteries, around Moscow and the front lines, leaving vast gaps in the interior coverage. The Ukrainian planners had spent months analyzing these gaps, using data from partisan spotters and open-source satellite imagery to plot flight paths that threaded the needle between radar bubbles. In the Oryol region, a drone aimed at a logistics hub was intercepted by a Tor M2 missile system, but the debris rained down on the intended railway switchyard, severing the power lines and fusing the track switches. Even a failure was a partial success. The psychological impact was even more severe. By hitting 13 regions simultaneously, Ukraine demonstrated that there was no safe rear area. Every fuel depot, every ammunition dump, and every airfield within 1,000 kilometers of the border was now a valid target. The illusion of distance, which had protected the Russian interior for the first 3 years of the war, had been shattered by a fleet of flying lawnmowers built in a garage. The most technically complex part of the operation was taking place over the Sea of Azov, where a group of modified Magura 5C drones were coordinating with the aerial assault. While the aerial drones drew the attention of the radars upwards, these unmanned surface vessels were skimming across the water toward the Kerch Strait. At 0345 hours, a Russian K-27 Helix helicopter, flying patrol near the bridge, spotted the wake of the lead sea drone. The pilot immediately engaged, strafing the water with machine gun fire. But the sea drone was not a passive target. This new variant was equipped with a modified R-73 air-to-air missile adapted for surface launch. As the helicopter banked for a second run, the drone's optical sensors locked onto the heat of the helicopter's engine exhaust. In a twist of modern warfare irony, the hunter became the hunted. The missile leaped from the rails on the tiny boat, covering the 2 kilometers to the helicopter in 4 seconds. The pilot never saw it coming. The explosion tore the tail rotor off the helix, sending the $12 million aircraft spinning into the dark water. The loss of the patrol helicopter created a blind spot in the defensive perimeter, a gap that the remaining sea drones immediately exploited, accelerating toward the bridge supports at 40 knots. Back in the Voronezh region, the initial strike on the airbase had triggered a massive secondary response. Fire crews were rushing toward the burning fuel farm, their sirens wailing in the night. But this response was exactly what the second wave of drones was waiting for. Known as a double-tap strike, a tactic as ruthless as it is effective, the second group of drones had been loitering in a holding pattern 10 kilometers away, listening for the radio traffic of the emergency services. At 03:55 hours, as the firefighters began deploying their hoses to fight the chemical fire, the second wave began its terminal dive. The objective was to disable the specialized firefighting vehicles and panic the personnel, ensuring the initial fire could burn out of control. It is a grim calculus, trading human lives for strategic destruction. The lead drone targeted the specialized airport crash tender, a massive vehicle crucial for extinguishing jet fuel fires. The impact turned the vehicle onto its side, shattering the windshield and igniting its own diesel tanks. The message was clear. Not only can we hit you, but we can also prevent you from fixing the damage. As dawn approached, the smoke from 13 different regions began to rise, creating black streaks against the morning sky that would be visible for miles. The Russian Ministry of Defense would claim they intercepted 80% of the targets, but the physics of burning oil refineries and cratered runways told a very different story. At 0415 hours, while the fire crews in Ryazan were losing their battle against physics and chemistry, the Russian air defense grid in the Tula region was experiencing a different kind of nightmare. The operators of an S-400 Triumph battery, a system that costs roughly $500 million and is touted as the best in the world, were staring at screens that looked like a chaotic, abstract painting. The Ukrainian mission planners had not just sent explosive drones. They had deployed a squadron of specialized electronic warfare decoys. These were modified commercial fixed-wing platforms carrying nothing but a battery and a jammer broadcasting noise on the X-band frequencies used by the S-400's engagement radar. To the Russian system, these cheap decoys appeared as a wall of incoming threats, forcing the automated fire control computer to prioritize targets based on signal strength rather than actual threat level. The battery commander, sweating in his command vehicle, authorized the launch of 6 40N6 long-range missiles. Each missile costs approximately $1.2 million. In less than 30 seconds, the Russian Federation spent $7.2 million to intercept 6 drones made of plywood and styrofoam that cost a combined total of $12,000. This was the economic asymmetry of modern war distilled into a single engagement. One side is spending the GDP of a small town to shoot down a high school science project, and they are still losing the exchange rate by orders of magnitude. As the decoys absorbed the expensive interceptors, the real payload slipstreamed through the gap in the radar coverage. 2 heavy-lift Baba Yaga drones, converted from agricultural sprayers to bombers, were approaching the Uzlovaya power substation. This facility is a critical node in the regional energy grid, stepping down 330 kilovolts for industrial use. The drones did not need to hit the transformers directly with explosives to cause a catastrophe. Instead, they dropped spools of conductive carbon fiber filaments directly onto the high-voltage bus bars. As the conductive material drifted down, it created thousands of short circuits simultaneously across the phases. The resulting electrical arc flash was brighter than the sun, vaporizing the copper windings inside the 300-ton transformers and boiling the insulating oil instantly. The explosion blew the ceramic insulators into shrapnel that shredded the control lines, cascading the failure through the grid. Within 3 seconds, 40% of the industrial capacity in the Tula region went dark, halting production at 3 munitions factories that relied on that stable power supply. The damage to the transformers was not just physical. These massive units take 6 to 12 months to manufacture, and with sanctions blocking the import of specialized high-voltage components, the lights in Tula were not coming back on anytime soon. By 0500 hours, the sun was rising over the logistical hub of Rostov-on-Don, revealing the extent of the coordinated chaos. This region serves as the primary artery for supplying Russian forces in occupied Ukraine, and the Ukrainian planners had targeted the railway marshalling yards with surgical precision. A swarm of 4 smaller FPV drones, guided by fiber optic cables to remain immune to the desperate jamming now flooding the airwaves, had struck the switching mechanisms of the main north-south line. They didn't blow up the tracks, which are easily repaired. They fuse the intricate manganese steel frogs of the switches, the mechanical hearts of the railway that allow trains to change tracks. Replacing a custom-cast railway switch takes a specialized engineering team 2 days, but the real damage was the backlog. Within 4 hours, 12 supply trains carrying ammunition, fuel, and armored vehicles were backed up for 60 kilometers, sitting stationary and exposed. To a satellite passing overhead, the line of stalled trains looked like a buffet for long-range artillery. The paralysis of the logistical network was more damaging than destroying any single tank battalion because a tank without fuel is just a heavy metal box, and a soldier without ammunition is just a target. The ripple effect of these 4 small explosions would be felt on the front lines in Donetsk 3 days later, when the expected artillery shells simply failed to arrive. The psychological impact of hitting 13 regions simultaneously cannot be overstated. In the deep rear, specifically in the Astrakhan region near the Caspian Sea, the target was the delicate specialized equipment used for launching cruise missiles from naval vessels. The strikes here were small, almost negligible in terms of TNT tonnage, but devastating in their precision. A single drone struck the calibration alignment tower at the naval base, a sensitive optical instrument used to program the guidance systems of Caliber missiles before they are loaded onto ships. Without this calibration, the missiles are effectively blind. The explosion knocked the tower 3 degrees off its axis, a shift invisible to the naked eye but catastrophic for a guidance computer. It would take Russian engineers weeks to diagnose why their missiles were suddenly missing targets by kilometers. And by the time they realized the calibration tower was compromised, the fleet's effectiveness would have been degraded by 40%. This was the genius of the operation. It wasn't just about blowing things up, it was about introducing friction, error, and doubt into every level of the Russian war machine. As the morning briefings began in Moscow, the grim arithmetic of the night's work became clear. The Russian Ministry of Defense claimed to have shot down 82 drones, a number that sounded impressive until you looked at what the remaining 18 had achieved. The total cost of the Ukrainian strike package, including the drones, the fuel, the intelligence gathering, and the decoys, was estimated at roughly $3.5 million. The cost of the Russian air defense missiles fired in panic was $40 million. The physical damage to refineries, substations, and rail infrastructure exceeded $600 million. But the lost economic output, the delayed logistics, and the strategic paralysis were worth billions. The operation had achieved a return on investment of roughly 17,000%. It demonstrated that in the age of drone warfare, the defender has to be lucky every single time, while the attacker only has to be lucky once. And on the night of July 30th, 2025, the laws of probability and physics were firmly on the side of the engineers in Kyiv.